Hello and welcome to my history revision video podcasts. This time it's the economy under Labour 1945 to 51. Let's start off with looking at nationalisation. Labour believed in directing the economy. Nationalisation of major industries had always been a major clause 4 of the Labour Party's constitution. Specifically, fuel and power, iron and steel and inland transport. Between 1945 and 51, there was quite a lot of industry nationalised. In 1946, it was coal, civil aviation, cable and wireless, and the Bank of England. In 1947, it was road transport and electricity. In 1948, it was gas, and in 1949, it was iron and steel. Labour believed that nationalisation would bring greater stability, safety, productivity, and efficiency to industry. It was still, though, a mixed economy, with some privately owned businesses, and compensation had to be given out to the previous owners of the nationalised industries. Steel in particular had to be given a lot more compensation, as it was the only one that was profit-making, and that led to questions whether it was justifiable to take over the steel industry at all. In fact, it was a Labour conference that forced it on Attlee, rather than it being Attlee's decision himself. In total, 20% of Britain's industry was nationalised by the end of 1951. The opposition to nationalisation. Well, it was very little until the iron and steel nationalisations, steel particularly as it was a shining example of how to run a private business. Until then, the war had won over public opinion for nationalisation as a good thing. Conservatives claimed abuse of government power and tried to get their Conservative lords, to block it, until they were prevented by the Parliamentary Reform Act of 1949 that reduced the Lords' powers. So the economic term that is used for this period is Keynesianism, and as a fall in demand for manufactured products causes recessions, if you maintain high demand, then decline can be prevented. And Keynes believed that government should use revenue powers to reinvest in economy, which causes stimulus. And this artificial boost leads to a real recovery, and then you can tax people to get the money back. Now, also in this period, you've got the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, July of that year, which set up the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, to bridge temporary imbalance of payments for various countries. It also came up with a monetary policy where currencies had to be linked to the dollar to maintain a permanent and consistent exchange rate, plus or minus to 1% of the dollar, which was linked to gold. Then the dollar effectively becomes the world currency. Now, Britain went through financial problems in this period. There were debts of £4,198 million, a balance of payments crisis, and exports of manufacturing dropped by 60%. We were getting $30 billion from the Lend-Lease scheme, but this scheme was dropped immediately after VJ Day, without warning, and Britain had no way to pay back its loans. Military costs had rose by 400% during the war. The government figured we needed a loan of $6 billion from America. Dalton and Keynes went over and got $3.75 billion with 2% interest for 50 years, which didn't really help because of the strong dollar and various clauses to ensure dollars could be exchanged for pounds freely after 1 year. There's also the fact that we'd made a political promise to increase spending further on military to stop communism, and 14% of GDP on defence was going on defence by the late 1940s. We have a commitment to independent nuclear deterrent, the Bevin quote, the bloody Union Jack on it, and we needed to force a continuation of rationing to pay for this, which caused austerity but low inflation. The deflationary policies, however, upset the unions. The welfare programme obviously cost a lot of money as well. In the winter of 1947, it was a particularly harsh winter, and pits closed as they were frozen over. There were floods. The clauses negotiated by Keynes regarding convertibility of the pound to dollars led to a run on it of speculation, with people selling it quickly. Convertibility then had to be stopped, and there was rationing of bread for the first time, which hadn't happened during the war. And this was all whilst Britain was ensuring there was no famine in the rest of its empire and Germany, even though it was really struggling at home. This destroyed Labour's reputation for economic management, so Derek Murphy says anyway. And the devaluation of the pound in 1949 by 30% was done with much dithering, Murphy says, by ministers. And obviously that devaluation can help, but it leads to a negative image of the Labour Party and their dealings with the economy. The Marshall Plan of July 1947, with its Marshall Aid functioning by 1948, was because the Americans realised what might happen if communism was left to exploit poor countries in Europe. Britain received $2.7 billion, the largest amount of any, but this was used to reduce the dollar deficit rather than actually build up industry. It heightened problems with Russia, leading to the Iron Curtain, and led to Britain opt out of Europe, as it showed that Europe was dependent on the USA. Okay, let's have a look at some historical interpretation. Marr says this was a time when the British government could have honestly explained what a grave situation we were in after the war. He also says the Marshall Plan was America's most unsordid act. Labour's nationalisation policy, says John O'Farrell, in 1945, wasn't just a matter of political dogma. Many of these crucial industries had been badly run before the war. He is a left-wing historian, though. Kenneth Morgan, depending if you know him or not, said the devaluation led to the prosperity enjoyed by the Conservatives in the 1950s, as therefore British goods were now cheaper for people to import, foreign countries to import and buy. He also says nationalisation was essential to sustain the morale and impetus of the Labour government. Back to Derek Murphy, he says the government was often uncertain about what the nationalised industries should do. And Corelli Barnett was critical of nationalisation. Also, he said West Germany, by delaying the welfare state until it had achieved industrial recovery, put itself on the path to an economic miracle, whereas Britain tried to go for the welfare state before it could afford it. That's the end of the economy in 1945 to 51. I'll see you next time for society in 1945 to 51.